everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me start by thanking the Palestine Solidarity Campaign for organizing this conference on the issue of apartheid. I think it's extremely important to discuss the issue of apartheid because diagnosing a proper diagnosis is extremely important for a right solution. And we want to know what is happening in Palestine. We have an occupation, so ending the occupation is imperative for a solution. But that's not all. I mean, suppose Israel today ends the occupation that started in 1967. Will justice have been served? The answer is no, as long as there is discrimination based on religion and on national origin. So, I'll talk a little bit about apartheid because during the last session, some asked questions on whether this is truly an apartheid regime, whether Israel has established an apartheid regime. So this will give me an opportunity to talk about the UNESCWA report. The UNESCWA report looked at how the nature of Israeli policies towards Palestinians. But as you know, Palestinians were fragmented. I mean, they're not living in one place. You have Palestinians living in Israel as citizens of Israel. You have Palestinians who were uprooted and they're living in refugee camps abroad. And you have Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza, occupied in 1967, and yet another category, Palestinians living in East Jerusalem, which was also occupied in 1967. But Israel has different policies for each segment of those Palestinians. So it's not exactly the same policies. The rules that apply to Palestinian citizens of Israel are not the same as the rules and laws that apply to citizens of East Jerusalem, nor, and there are different rules for Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. The importance of the UNESCWA report is that it assessed Israeli policies towards Palestinians living in each and every one of these 4 different domains, and they found that all policies were by law discriminatory. Now, then based on this analysis of Israeli policies against Palestinians in the 4 domains, Professors Richard Falk and Virginia Kelly could determine that Israel is imposing on all Palestinians, or the regime that Israel is imposing on all Palestinians is an apartheid regime. Now, as you know, there is a very strict definition in international law on what qualifies or what amounts to apartheid. The reason is because apartheid is a serious crime. It's a crime against humanity. So it's as if those who wrote international law wanted to make sure that you cannot use this accusation lightly. So you have to prove, in order to prove that a regime imposed on a certain people is an apartheid regime, you have to abide by what the definition states. So Richard Falk and Virginia Kelly have to show 4 things. The first is that Israel is committing the inhumane acts listed in the Apartheid Convention. So Apartheid Convention has a series of acts that in order to amount to apartheid, the regime or the government has to be committing those acts. And they showed that it is committing those acts against all Palestinians in Israel, as citizens of Israel, and in the occupied territories, and as refugees. Second, that those acts are committed against a specific racial group and not against others. So, I mean, if you have a despot who treats all his people in a very ruthless manner, then that despot may commit genocide, but not apartheid. Apartheid is you have to select a racial group and then target that racial group with the inhumane acts. And this is what Virginia and Richard could show through that only the Palestinians are targeted, but not Jewish Israelis. The third condition was that those acts are part of an institutionalized regime. So it's not a white officers, let's say, mistreating African Americans or somebody who is mistreating immigrants, which is against the law. When we say it's institutionalized, it means the law allows you to treat them as lesser citizens or lesser human beings. And actually, they managed to show through analyzing all the laws that Israel is applying that in the case of Palestinians, it is institutionalized. The laws discriminate against them. And finally, that those acts have the intention or purpose of maintaining the system of racial domination and oppression. In other words, that the system doesn't allow you to take your grievances to a court so that justice can be served. In this case, it's like, for example, Palestinian citizens of Israel cannot take discrimination against them to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has ruled that Israel is not the nation state of the Israeli people. It is the nation state of the Jewish people. France is the nation state of the French people, Germany of the German people. Israel is not the nation state of the Israeli people. So by definition, legally, non-Jewish citizens of Israel do not have the rights that its Jewish citizens have. Now, pursuant to the publication of the UNESCWA report, Israel passed its new basic law that I guess you must have discussed this morning, which is Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. I mean, initially it was a Supreme Court ruling, now it is a basic law, which means it's a constitution, it's a constitutional law. Although the apartheid regime didn't start with this new basic law, actually it confirmed to many what they have already assumed, that Israel has imposed an apartheid regime. Now, what's the significance of the new law? The new law makes discrimination a constitutional value. So there is no equality. It rejects the principle of equality. And it makes segregation a national treasure. So actually, at a time when countries should seek more inclusive policies, now Israel says, no, segregation is a national treasure. It condemns Israel's non-Jewish citizens who have lived in the land for millennia to a second-class status subject to never-ending marginalization and dispossession. Also, Israel apartheid regime didn't start when Israel occupied the West Bank. You've mentioned this. You have two laws, two groups of people, so I don't have to elaborate more. The same goes for refugees. The only reason refugees were uprooted and the only reason that they cannot go back to their homeland is because they weren't born Jewish. Let me go to Israeli citizens, because there was a question in the last session that it's very difficult to show, it's very easy to show that Israel discriminates, has an apartheid regime imposed on Palestinians in the occupied territories and imposed on refugees. What about Israel's Palestinian citizens who are allowed to vote? Well, the fact is Israel differentiates between citizenship and nationality. Only Jews can be nationals of the state of Israel. Non-Jews can be citizens, but they cannot be nationals. Therefore, they are deprived of all the nationality rights that is made available exclusively to its Jewish citizens. Now, this includes political rights. It includes the right to use the land of Israel. I mean, now the laws say that the land of Israel can be developed only for the benefit of its Jewish citizens. They don't have the right wherever they want, because there are laws that tells them that certain areas are closed. They do not. They are not socially. They do not socially fit into there are over 300 Jewish towns. So if you look at the laws, there are, I think, over 60 laws that discriminate directly and indirectly against the non-Jewish citizens of Israel. Directly, where rights are exclusively given to Jewish citizens. Indirectly is like saying, in order to receive the following benefits, you should have had served in the army, knowing that the non-Jewish citizens, or most of them, do not serve in the army, therefore they are automatically excluded from benefits. There are calculations, the amount of money that Israel allocates to its non-Jewish citizens. For example, a Palestinian Israeli citizen gets less than student gets less than 1/4 of what an Israeli Jewish student gets from the budget. If you talk about, you will also hear, I'm just getting off script because I want to address the issue that was raised in the previous session. So even in something like the labor market, there are laws that says discrimination is not allowed. But you can take a number of examples. Palestinians are something like 20% of the citizens of Israel. There is only one Palestinian employee in the Israeli central bank, and that employee got that job only after he decided to sue. If you look at ministries, the representation of Palestinians in some of them is less than 1% or 2%. Even if you look at huge corporations, it's 0.0 something. So they are excluded by prejudice and by practice, if not by law. Let me, halfway through. I'm sorry. Okay. So let me. Okay. No. So let me just say that the apartheid regime has existed since the establishment of the State of Israel, when it decided that when its founder opted for a legal architecture that codifies a privileged status for its Jewish citizens and allows discrimination against all others, particularly its Palestinian citizens. Why did the world turn a blind eye to this apartheid regime? I think for three reasons. The first, some were driven by imperialist designs and they thought that this is a very important venture. The second, I think it's a sense of guilt for an ugly history of anti-Semitism and discrimination against their Jewish citizens. So they thought that this is a project worth their while. And then I think the third reason is a colonial mentality that saw the indigenous population unworthy of equal rights. So that was, we have seen a history of turning a blind eye to Israel's policies, but things have changed recently. If you look at many of the new books, new publications, new op-eds, new columnists, they are all focusing on the threat that Israeli apartheid poses not only to rights of the Palestinians, but also to international peace and security and to stability in the region. Then came the UNESCWA report. I'll talk a little bit about the UNESCWA report. Now, as I said, the UNESCWA report proved beyond reasonable doubt that Israel was guilty of the crime of apartheid. The report was viciously attacked, basically by Israel and by the United States. I thought the campaign that they waged against UNESCWA, against me, against Richard Falk, against Virginia Tilly, really bordered on hysteria. They pressured the Secretary General. They pressured the Secretary General to. I'm sorry.
I think it's going off sometimes. You just need to hold it very close to your mouth.
Okay, like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So they pressured the Secretary General, they wanted him to withdraw the report, and of course the Secretary General applied, in turn, he applied similar pressure on me. I mean, basically he gave me the choice between implementing his directives or resigning. I opted to resign over withdrawing the report. The reason I opted to resign is, for me, withdrawing the report was tantamount to suppressing evidence of an ongoing crime that is at the root of so much human suffering. So the report was removed from the UNESCWA website, but I want you to know that it was not unpublished. It's still a UN document. It's not on the UNESCWA website, but it remains a very important official UN document that can support and guide our work to achieve justice in Palestine. Why is it important? It's important because it was produced by an intergovernmental body. It's not a think tank that produced it, it's UNESCWA. And it was, the reason it was produced is because there was a resolution by the member states of this intergovernmental body to produce such a report. And this is exactly why they fought the report, because it was produced by an intergovernmental body. Of course, they weren't hoping that the report will disappear. They knew this is a lost battle. However, what in my opinion they wanted from this campaign against the report is to intimidate member states so that they will not move forward with submitting the report to the General Assembly or to the Human Rights Council in order to issue an affirmative and categorical opinion on the type of regime that Israel has imposed. Let me skip. Now, knowing that only resolutions taken at intergovernmental meetings by a majority of member states are categorical and binding. Now that's why the authors of the UNESCWA report knew that they wanted a ruling by an international tribunal that would make the assessment that Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid truly authoritative. They called upon member states to fulfill their international responsibilities in relation to international law and the rights of the Palestinian people. They reminded them of their legal obligation to prevent and punish instances of apartheid that are responsibly brought to their attention. And they demanded that the issue be treated as a matter of urgency and recommended that the international community act immediately without waiting for a formal pronouncement, because the crime was ongoing and because the delay would only compound the crime and prolong the suffering and subjugation of Palestinians. Now, let me go to the final part, which is we all know that member states didn't live up to their responsibilities. So, if those with the mandate and power to act couldn't or wouldn't, can we, as civil society organizations and individuals, do anything to help end apartheid and achieve equality and justice? I personally believe we can. We only need to recall that apartheid in South Africa was brought to an end in part by the transnational activism of civil society and the grassroots support for measures like sanctions and boycotts. We not only can, but we also should. I believe it's our moral duty to use all peaceful instruments at our disposal to exert pressure on Israel to dismantle apartheid, all the apartheid structures. Now, I know that many of the organizations present here are already doing a lot in this respect. So the real question for us today is not whether to act or not to act, but how to make our actions more effective. To answer this question, in the last 4 minutes that I have, we need to understand our strengths and weaknesses and identify the opportunities and threats we face. Or in other words, I'm borrowing from the business world what they call their SWOT analysis. So let me start with the threats. We have to acknowledge that the obstacles we face can be daunting for the weak-hearted. Unlike movements struggling against apartheid in South Africa, we have no intergovernmental consensus at the United Nations to cover us, while our adversary has the support of the most powerful nation in the world. More concerning is that that nation has of late become less respectful of human rights, international law, and universal values. Hence, it has no qualms about violating international law itself and using its financial and political weight to defend such violations by its allies, in specific Israel. It has also no qualms about violating our freedom of expression and our right to use peaceful means to address historic wrongs. It, along with some other countries, have resorted to a variety of means, many that violate the principles of the law, to cripple us by demonizing the non-violent resistance to oppression we adopt and criminalizing the BDS movement we support. They are bent on conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, while Israel is always ready to use the charge of anti-Semitism against anyone who criticizes its policies or practices against the Palestinians. Moving to our strengths, I think our greatest is the fact that we stand for what is right and just. It is true that all claim to stand for justice as they interpreted it. But for us, we stand with what humanity as a whole has agreed is right and just, as enshrined in the multiple statements of principles and treaties approved over the past 70 years by members of the international community. The value system we subscribe to is the one emanating from the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which emphasize that all people are born equal in human dignity, that they are all entitled to enjoy on an equal footing all human rights and fundamental freedoms in all fields of public life, that no one should be disadvantaged because of what they were born into or born without. We agree that, and here I'm quoting from international treaties, that the existence of racial barriers is repugnant to the ideals of any human society, and that any doctrine of superiority based on racial differentiation is scientifically false, morally condemnable, socially unjust and dangerous, and that there is no justification for racial discrimination in theory or in practice anywhere. Our struggle is focused against any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin. And our struggle is for justice, equality, and dignity as dictated by international law. As for the opportunity, skip opportunity. Well, anyway, I think it lies in the rising awareness in the many corners of the world about the issue of apartheid. This brings me to the final point, which is weaknesses. No, I won't take that one. Okay. In my opinion, our major weakness is fragmentation and absence of a coordination mechanism that will make the total sum of our efforts more than the sum of its parts. There is no doubt that many of the organizations working for justice in Palestine have achieved notable breakthroughs. I have many examples that I will not, including BDS, the Irish Sadaqa, Jewish Voice for Peace, etc. These notable achievements and others can multiply manyfold if organizations have a common platform through which they can share experiences, disseminate information, mobilize support for their global campaigns, and coordinate activities to maximize impact and minimize cost. One way to do this is to establish a global alliance against Israeli apartheid. Some would want to call it Global Alliance for Justice in Palestine, but I think it can be either, as long as we know what we want. We want to end apartheid and we want justice to be served. And this alliance, the idea of it will be a supporting and coordination tool for all its member organizations. Any organization working fully or partly to achieve justice in Palestine can join the alliance, which will be governed by its member organizations. The alliance can also set up a small secretariat to help its member organizations coordinate their work in 5 main areas. I'm almost done. One, awareness raising and the production and dissemination of knowledge regarding the various aspects of Israeli apartheid. Second, supporting peaceful resistance to apartheid, including BDS. Third, supporting legal action to counter attempts to constrain the rights of people to free opinion and expression, and to hold those responsible for the crime of apartheid accountable. 4, supporting grassroots movements in the different countries. And 5, coordinating participation in global conventions and UN fora like ECOSOC and the Human Rights Council. I have to stop here. Let me just say that there's a lot more, but I can post my note. I think it's basically it's time for us to unite in action against what is uniting us in grief. Let's work together. Thank you.